The telegram arrived on a sweltering July afternoon in 1875. Its folded yellow paper no match for the dust that clung to everything in Fort Worth, Texas. Penelope Turner stood on the rickety platform of the train station, her throat dry with nerves as she watched passengers disembark from the newly arrived locomotive. She clutched the now crumpled paper in her gloved hand, the words memorized after days of reading it during her journey from Boston. Position secured. Arrive Fort Worth by July 15th. Will meet at station. Samuel Caldwell. She smoothed her travel-worn dress, painfully aware that 3 days on a train had done her appearance no favors. Her chestnut hair, once neatly pinned, had rebelled against its confines, wisps escaping to frame her face in the humidity. The elegant traveling outfit she departed in now seemed laughably out of place amid the raw, untamed energy of Fort Worth. The platform emptied quickly, leaving Penelope alone save for a station master who eyed her with curiosity. No one had approached her. No Samuel Caldwell had claimed her as his mail-order bride. "Excuse me," she finally asked the station master, desperation creeping into her voice. "I'm looking for Mr. Samuel Caldwell. He was to meet me here today." The weathered man scratched his gray beard. "Sam Caldwell. Got a ranch 'bout 5 miles west of town. Ain't seen him today, though." Penelope's stomach nodded. She had exactly $2.75 to her name, not enough for a room, much less a return ticket to Boston where nothing but shame awaited her anyway. "Is there somewhere I might wait? Perhaps he's merely delayed." The station master gave her a look that mixed pity with resignation. "Station closes at sundown, madam. There's a hotel down the street if you've got the means." 3 hours later, as the sun began its descent behind the buildings of Fort Worth, Penelope sat on her trunk, fighting tears. The brutal reality of her situation was setting in. 23 years old, alone in a frontier town, abandoned by a man she'd never met but had agreed to marry out of desperation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. A tall man on horseback pulled to a stop before the station, dust swirling around him. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. "Miss Turner." His voice was deep, with the distinctive drawl of Texas. She stood quickly, relief flooding through her. "Mr. Caldwell." The man pushed his hat back, revealing piercing blue eyes that assessed her with undisguised surprise. "Yes, madam, Samuel Caldwell. I apologize for my tardiness. Had some trouble with cattle rustlers that needed immediate attention." Penelope nodded, trying to appear understanding though her nerves were frayed. "I'm pleased to finally meet you, Mr. Caldwell." He continued to stare at her, and Penelope felt herself wilt under his scrutiny. She knew what he saw: a slender woman with delicate features, hands that had never known hard labor, and clothes too fine and impractical for ranch life. Nothing like the sturdy, experienced farm woman he had likely expected when he'd placed his advertisement for a wife. "I'm not what you expected," she apologized, heat flooding her cheeks. Samuel studied her for a long moment before a slow smile spread across his tanned face. "You're everything I never knew I needed, Miss Turner." The words took her aback. They weren't what she'd anticipated from this rugged man, whose life was surely as different from hers as the Texas landscape was from Boston's prim gardens. "My wagon's just around the corner," he continued, picking up her trunk with ease. "We should get going if we want to reach the ranch before full dark." The wagon ride through Fort Worth revealed a town still finding its identity. Cattle drives had transformed what had once been a small military outpost into a growing community. Cowboys and merchants mingled on wooden sidewalks alongside the occasional well-dressed businessman. Women were fewer, and those Penelope observed moved with purpose, their plain clothing practical for the harsh environment. "Fort Worth's growing fast," Samuel commented as they passed the newly constructed courthouse. "The railroads changed everything. Brings cattle buyers from back east, supplies mail." He glanced at her and brides. Penelope managed a small smile. "Have you lived here long, Mr. Caldwell?" "All my life. My father settled here when it was still just a fort, built our ranch from nothing." Pride colored his voice. "Now it's mine to maintain." As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up before them, vast and intimidating in its emptiness. The setting sun painted the prairie in hues of gold and amber, beautiful in its wild way, yet so alien to Penelope that her chest tightened with apprehension. "It must seem strange to you," Samuel observed, apparently reading her thoughts. "Coming from Boston and all." "It's different," she admitted, "but beautiful in its own way." He nodded, pleased with her response. "What made you answer my advertisement, Miss Turner, if you don't mind my asking?" Penelope hesitated. How could she explain that her father's death had left her penniless, that her cousin's offer of protection had come with expectations that had made her skin crawl? How could she tell this stranger that she'd chosen to marry an unknown rancher in Texas rather than submit to a fate that would have destroyed her soul in Boston? "I sought a new beginning," she said finally. "My parents are deceased, and I found myself with few options." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Honest answer, I appreciate that." He flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. "Ranch life is hard, Miss Turner, harder than anything you've likely known. But it's good, too. Honest work, clean air. I'm willing to learn," she said, more firmly than she felt. "I may not know much about ranching, but I'm no stranger to hard work." His sidelong glance suggested skepticism, but he nodded. "We'll take it a day at a time." As the wagon crested a gentle rise, Samuel pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is, Caldwell Ranch." Penelope gazed at the sprawling property below them. A modest but well-maintained two-story house sat nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and in the distance, she could make out corrals containing horses and cattle. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but there was something solid and reassuring about it. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Samuel seemed surprised by her reaction. "It's not what you're used to, I'm sure." "No," she agreed, "but that doesn't mean it can't become home." Something in his expression softened, and for a moment, Penelope felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this arrangement might work after all. The wagon rolled to a stop before the house, and a woman emerged from the doorway. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and a weathered face that had seen its share of Texas sun. "This is Mrs. Rivera," Samuel explained as he helped Penelope down. "She keeps house for me and does the cooking. She's been with my family since I was a boy." Mrs. Rivera's sharp eyes took in Penelope from head to toe, not bothering to hide her assessment. "So you're the bride," she said finally, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage. "Yes, madam, Penelope Turner." She extended her hand, which Mrs. Rivera regarded momentarily before taking it in a brief, firm handshake. "Come inside. You must be hungry after your journey." The housekeeper turned and headed back into the house, clearly expecting them to follow. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, if simple, decor. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, currently unlit due to the summer heat. Penelope noted touches that spoke of a woman's influence from years past: handmade curtains, a carefully arranged collection of books, a needlepoint pillow on the rocking chair. "Your mother had beautiful taste," Penelope observed. Samuel looked startled. Yes, she did. She passed 5 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. He nodded his thanks and gestured toward a hallway. Mrs. Rivera will show you to your room. You can rest before supper. My room. Penelope couldn't hide her confusion. Samuel's face colored slightly. We're not properly married yet, Miss Turner. I've arranged for Reverend Walsh to come out to the ranch on Sunday. Until then, you'll have your privacy. The unexpected consideration touched her. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Rivera led her to a small but pleasant bedroom on the second floor. It contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a wooden wardrobe. Samuel's mother's room, the housekeeper explained. He had me air it out and prepare it when your letter came saying you'd accepted his proposal. Penelope sat on the edge of the bed once Mrs. Rivera had left, the reality of her situation sinking in fully. She was here, in Texas, about to marry a man she'd just met. The life she'd known was gone forever. Yet as she unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in the wardrobe, she felt a strange sense of rightness. Perhaps it was merely relief at having safely arrived after weeks of uncertainty. Or perhaps it was something about Samuel Caldwell himself, the kindness in his eyes when he'd said those unexpected words. You're everything I never knew I needed. Supper that evening was a simple but hearty affair of beef stew, cornbread, and fresh tomatoes from the kitchen garden. Samuel, having cleaned up after his day's work, sat across from her at the large oak table. Mrs. Rivera served them before retreating to the kitchen, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. The stew is delicious, Penelope offered, desperate to break the tension. Samuel nodded. Mrs. Rivera's cooking is one of the reasons I've survived as a bachelor this long. He paused, seeming to realize the implication. Not that I'm marrying you just for your cooking skills. Despite herself, Penelope laughed. I should warn you that my culinary abilities are limited. My family employed a cook. I figured as much, he said, not unkindly. Your hands gave you away. Penelope glanced down at her smooth, unblemished hands. I'm afraid I have much to learn about ranch life. What skills do you have, Miss Turner? His tone was curious rather than accusatory. She considered the question. I play the piano, though I notice you don't have one. I read extensively. I can sew and embroider quite well. I speak French and a little Italian. I can manage household accounts. She trailed off, acutely aware of how useless these accomplishments seemed in her new environment. To her surprise, Samuel looked impressed. Education is never wasted, Miss Turner. We may not have much call for French out here, but reading and figures are always useful. As for the rest, you'll learn what you need to know. Why did you advertise for a wife, Mr. Caldwell? The question escaped before she could consider its propriety. He didn't seem offended. Practical reasons, mostly. A ranch needs a woman's touch. I need children to pass it on to someday. He took a sip of water. Fort Worth isn't exactly overflowing with eligible women, and those who are here have their pick of suitors. I figured casting a wider net might bring better results. And did it? Penelope asked softly. Samuel met her gaze directly. I believe it did. Later that night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Penelope listened to the sounds of the Texas night so different from Boston's. Crickets chirped incessantly, occasionally punctuated by the distant howl of a coyote. The house creaked and settled around her, and from somewhere, nearby came the soft nickering of horses. Despite the strangeness, she felt safer than she had in months. Samuel Caldwell might be a stranger, but he'd shown her nothing but respect and consideration. It was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd boarded that train in Boston. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the simple cotton curtains. Penelope rose early, determined to make a good impression. She chose her plainest dress, a blue cotton that was still far too fine for ranch work, and pinned her hair in a simple style. Mrs. Rivera was already bustling about the kitchen when she descended the stairs. "Good morning," Penelope greeted her. "May I help with breakfast?" The housekeeper gave her an appraising look. "You know how to make biscuits?" "No, but I'm willing to learn." Mrs. Rivera nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. "Watch first, do later." For the next hour, Penelope observed as the older woman mixed flour, lard, and buttermilk with practiced hands, explaining each step in her accented English. The resulting biscuits emerged golden and fragrant from the oven just as Samuel entered from outside, the scent of morning air clinging to him. "You're up early," he remarked, washing his hands at the kitchen pump. "I thought I should begin learning my duties," Penelope replied. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Mrs. Rivera is a good teacher." "She has much to learn," the housekeeper interjected, placing a plate of eggs and biscuits before Samuel. "But she watches well." Coming from Mrs. Rivera, Penelope suspected this was high praise indeed. After breakfast, Samuel gave her a tour of the ranch. The morning was already hot, the sun beating down relentlessly on the sprawling property. Penelope was grateful for her parasol as they walked from the house to the various outbuildings. "The barn," Samuel indicated the largest structure. Inside, the smell of hay and horses filled the air. Several horses occupied stalls along one wall, their curious eyes following the newcomer. "They're beautiful," Penelope said, approaching a chestnut mare who nickered softly. "That's Penny," Samuel said, then chuckled. "Seems she shares your name." "She's gentle, might make a good mount for you once you learn to ride." Penelope turned to him in surprise. "You'll teach me to ride?" "Can't have my wife unable to get around the ranch," he replied matter-of-factly. "Unless you already know how." "No, I've only ever ridden in carriages." She turned back to the mare, stroking her velvet nose. "Hello, Penny, we'll be friends, I think." Next came the chicken coop where dozens of hens scratched and clucked. "Eggs need collecting every morning," Samuel explained. "Mrs. Rivera usually does it, but it'll be your job soon enough." They continued to the vegetable garden, the smokehouse, the springhouse where milk and butter were kept cool, and finally to the corrals where several cowboys were working with cattle. "That's Pedro and James." Samuel pointed to two men mending a fence. "They live in the bunkhouse with the other hands. Good men, been with me for years." The men tipped their hats respectfully when Samuel introduced Penelope, their curious gazes taking in the city woman who would be their boss's wife. By the time they returned to the house, Penelope's head was spinning with all she'd seen and learned. The scale of the operation was impressive, as was the efficient way Samuel managed it all. "It's a lot to take in," he acknowledged as they stood on the front porch. "Don't worry about learning everything at once. It's a fine ranch," she said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you've built here." "My father built most of it," Samuel corrected her. "I'm just trying to preserve his legacy and maybe expand it a bit." "Still, it takes skill to maintain such an operation." He seemed pleased by her understanding. "I should get back to work. Mrs. Rivera can help you get settled in. If you need anything, just ask." As the week progressed, Penelope tried to absorb as much as possible about her new home. Mrs. Rivera, initially standoffish, gradually warmed to her as Penelope demonstrated a genuine willingness to learn. By Thursday, Penelope could make a passable batch of biscuits, gather eggs without sending the chickens into a panic, and had begun to understand the rhythm of ranch life. Samuel, for his part, was gone for much of each day, returning tired and dusty from working with the cattle or repairing fences. Their interactions were limited to meals and brief conversations in the evening, but Penelope found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, capable man. Friday evening brought a surprise. Samuel returned from town with a small package which he presented to Penelope after supper. "What's this?" she asked, untying the brown paper. "Just a small token for our wedding. It's nothing fancy." Inside was a simple gold band. Penelope held it in her palm, touched by the gesture. "It's lovely, Samuel." She'd begun using his given name the day before, at his insistence. "Belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "My grandfather gave it to her when they settled in Texas. Seemed fitting." The personal significance of the gift moved her deeply. "I'll treasure it." Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Penelope felt a flutter of something new, not just gratitude or relief, but a genuine attraction to this man who would be her husband in just 2 days. Saturday brought clouds and the promise of rain, a welcome prospect after days of relentless heat. Penelope spent the morning helping Mrs. Rivera clean the house in preparation for the Reverend's visit the next day. "No big wedding?" she asked as they polished the rarely used silver. Mrs. Rivera shook her head. "Samuel doesn't like fuss. Just Reverend Walsh and maybe a few ranch hands as witnesses." "That seems appropriate," Penelope agreed, though a small part of her couldn't help but compare it to the elaborate wedding she'd once imagined for herself back in Boston. The afternoon brought the promised rain, a steady downpour that transformed the dusty landscape into a sea of mud. Samuel returned early, soaked to the skin. "This rain's a blessing and a curse," he commented as he removed his dripping hat. "Good for the land, bad for getting work done." Penelope handed him a towel. "Perhaps you could use the time to rest. You've been working so hard." He accepted the towel with a grateful nod. "Not much rest to be had on a ranch, I'm afraid, but I suppose the paperwork's been piling up. Might be a good day to tackle it." After changing into dry clothes, Samuel settled at the desk in the small study off the main room, ledgers and correspondence spread before him. Penelope brought him coffee, lingering in the doorway. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she offered. Samuel looked up, surprise evident on his face. "You know anything about ranch accounts?" "I managed my father's household accounts for several years before his death," she explained. "I'm quite good with figures." He considered this, then gestured to the chair beside him. "Well then, Mrs. Almost Caldwell, let's see what you make of these." For the next several hours, they worked side by side, Penelope quickly grasping the ranch's financial situation. Samuel was a meticulous record keeper, but admitted he found the task tedious. Penelope, on the other hand, found satisfaction in organizing the figures and identifying patterns in the ranch's expenses and income. "You've got a good head for business," Samuel commented as they finished reconciling the quarterly accounts. "That's a skill that'll serve the ranch well." "I'm pleased to be of use," Penelope replied, warmed by his approval. The rain continued into the evening, drumming steadily on the roof as they sat before the fire after supper. Mrs. Rivera had retired early, leaving them alone for the first time since Penelope's arrival. "Tell me about Boston," Samuel requested, his expression curious. "I've never been further east than St. Louis." Penelope described the city's cobblestone streets, grand buildings, and cultivated gardens. She told him about attending concerts and lectures, about the changing seasons and the way the city transformed from bustling activity in summer to quiet beauty under winter snow. "It sounds very civilized," Samuel remarked when she finished. "You must miss it." "Parts of it," she admitted. "But there were constraints there too. Expectations about how a woman should behave, who she should marry." She hesitated. "When my father died and left only debts, those same people who had welcomed us into their homes suddenly had no time for us. My mother had already passed years before, so I was alone." What about other family? Penelope's expression clouded. My cousin Horace offered to take me in. He was not a kind man. His intentions were not honorable. Samuel's jaw tightened. I see. So you see, your advertisement seemed like Providence. She smiled faintly. A new life, far from Boston and its painful memories. Well, we don't have many fancy concerts out here, Samuel said after a moment. But we do have dances in town sometimes, and good people once you get to know them. I'd like that. They fell silent, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. The rain created a cozy cocoon around them, and Penelope realized she felt more at peace in this moment than she had in a very long time. We should turn in, Samuel said eventually. Tomorrow's a big day. As they rose, a sudden clap of thunder shook the house, making Penelope jump. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding Samuel's arm. He stood very still, his eyes moving from her hand to her face. Sorry, she murmured, withdrawing her touch. The thunder startled me. No need to apologize. His voice was soft. Tentatively, he reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. Good night, Penelope. Good night, Samuel. She climbed the stairs to her room, her cheek still tingling from his touch, aware that tomorrow night she wouldn't be sleeping alone. Sunday dawned clear and fresh, the previous day's rain having washed the world clean. Penelope woke early, nerves and excitement making sleep impossible. Today she would become Mrs. Samuel Caldwell. She dressed carefully in her best gown, a sage green silk that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. It was perhaps too formal for a simple ranch wedding, but it was the only truly nice dress she had brought with her. Her hair she arranged in a simple but elegant twist, adorned with a small spray of wildflowers Mrs. Rivera had surprisingly presented her with that morning. Something pretty for the bride, the housekeeper had said, her usual stern expression softening. Samuel knocked on her door just before noon. When she opened it, his eyes widened appreciatively. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. She took in his appearance. He wore a clean black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. You look quite handsome yourself, he offered his arm. Reverend Walsh just arrived. Are you ready? She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric. Yes, I believe I am. The ceremony took place in the front parlor, witnessed by Mrs. Rivera, Pedro James, and 2 other ranch hands. Reverend Walsh, a kindly man with silver hair and spectacles, performed the brief service with genuine warmth. When it came time for the ring, Samuel took her hand in his touch gentle as he slid his grandmother's ring onto her finger. With this ring I thee wed, he recited, his blue eyes holding her steadily. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Walsh declared. You may kiss your bride. Samuel hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a soft, chaste kiss on Penelope's lips. It was over quickly, but it left her breathless nonetheless. Mrs. Rivera had prepared a special meal to celebrate roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. The ranch hands ate heartily, offering awkward but sincere congratulations before taking their leave to return to their duties. After Reverend Walsh departed with a final blessing, Samuel and Penelope found themselves alone, husband and wife in fact as well as name. Would you like to go for a walk? Samuel suggested. It's a fine afternoon. Grateful for his sensitivity, Penelope agreed. They strolled away from the house toward a small rise that offered a view of the entire ranch. The land stretched out before them, green from the recent rain, dotted with grazing cattle. Does it feel strange? Samuel asked. Being married to someone you barely know? A bit, she admitted. But no stranger than many marriages back east that are arranged for social or financial advantage. He nodded thoughtfully. I want you to be happy here, Penelope. I know it's not what you're used to, but I hope in time you might come to love the ranch as I do. I think I already am, she said truthfully. There's a freedom here I never experienced in Boston. A chance to be useful in ways that matter. And your husband, he asked quietly. Do you think you might come to care for him too in time? Penelope turned to face him fully, taking in his strong features, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet dignity that seemed to define him. I think that might be the easiest part of all. Relief and something more washed over his face. Slowly, he bent his head and kissed her again, this time with more assurance. His lips were warm against hers, and when his arms came around her, Penelope found herself responding naturally, her hands resting against his chest. When they broke apart, Samuel kept her close. I didn't expect to feel this way, he confessed. When I placed that advertisement, I was thinking practically a partnership, a helpmate. I never imagined I might find someone who makes me feel complete. Penelope smiled, touched by his honesty. I think that's what marriage should be, finding the missing piece of yourself in another person. They remained on the hillside until the sun began to set, talking more openly than they ever had before. Samuel shared stories of growing up on the ranch, of his father's stern but fair guidance, his mother's gentle influence. Penelope told him about her childhood in Boston, her love of books and music, her dreams for the future. As darkness fell, they walked hand in hand back to the house, their home now. Mrs. Rivera had discreetly retired to her small quarters off the kitchen, leaving them truly alone. In the soft glow of lamplight, Samuel led Penelope not to her small room but to the master bedroom at the end of the hall. It was larger than her room, dominated by a wide bed covered with a handmade quilt. A washstand stood in one corner, a wardrobe in another, and a comfortable chair near the window. I had Mrs. Rivera move your things in here today, he explained. I hope that's all right. Yes, she said simply. He crossed to her, his hands finding her waist. I don't want to rush you, Penelope. Marriage is a big adjustment, and if you need time, she silenced him with a finger to his lips. I chose this, Samuel. I chose you. Their coming together that night was tender and careful, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory. Samuel was gentle, mindful of her inexperience, and Penelope found herself responding to his touch with surprising ease. In the quiet aftermath, lying in her husband's arms, she marveled at how quickly life could change, how a desperate decision made in Boston had led her to this moment of unexpected contentment in the arms of a Texas rancher. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm as Penelope adapted to her new role as Mrs. Caldwell. Each day brought new challenges and lessons, learning to ride astride rather than side saddle, mastering Mrs. Rivera's recipes, understanding the cycle of ranch work that dictated their lives. Samuel proved a patient teacher, particularly when it came to riding. He started her on the gentle mare Penny, instructing her on how to saddle the horse, how to mount, how to communicate with subtle shifts of weight and pressure. You're a natural, he observed after her third lesson, when she'd successfully guided Penny around the corral at a trot. Most city folks take weeks to look that comfortable on a horse. I have an excellent teacher, she replied with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. August brought scorching heat that tested Penelope's endurance. The work of the ranch continued regardless of temperature. Animals needed tending, meals needed cooking, clothes needed washing. She developed calluses on her once smooth hands and a golden tan on her previously pale skin. Samuel found her one evening standing before the small mirror in their bedroom, examining her reflection with a rueful expression. "What is it?" he asked, coming to stand behind her. I was just thinking how shocked my Boston acquaintances would be if they could see me now, she replied. I hardly recognized myself. It was true the woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the proper Bostonian who had stepped off the train 6 weeks earlier. This woman's face was sun-kissed, her hair simply braided rather than elaborately styled, her clothing practical rather than fashionable. Samuel's hands came to rest on her shoulders. "Do you regret it, the changes?" She turned in his arms, facing him directly. "Not for a moment. I feel more alive here than I ever did in Boston, more myself somehow." "You've taken to ranch life better than I ever hoped," he admitted. "Mrs. Rivera says you're the quickest study she's ever taught." "High praise indeed," Penelope laughed. Knowing the housekeeper's exacting standards, Samuel's expression grew more serious. "I've been meaning to ask you something, but wasn't sure how you'd feel about it." "What is it?" "The town's having a harvest dance next Saturday. I thought we might go. Introduce you to some of the other families around Fort Worth." Penelope brightened. "I'd like that very much. I've been curious about the town and its people." "It won't be like the social events you're used to," he cautioned. "Pretty simple affair at the town hall, fiddle music, basic refreshments." "It sounds wonderful," she assured him. "And it will be nice to wear a dress that isn't covered in flour or dust for a change." The week leading up to the dance was filled with anticipation. Penelope washed and pressed her best remaining dress, a blue silk that she'd saved for special occasions. Mrs. Rivera helped her style her hair the evening of the dance, revealing unexpected skill with a curling iron heated over the fire. "You look my bonita," the older woman said approvingly when they'd finished. "Samuel will be proud to show you off." Samuel's reaction when Penelope descended the stairs confirmed Mrs. Rivera's prediction. He stood waiting in his good suit, hat in hand, and the admiration in his eyes as he beheld his wife made her heart skip. "You are a vision, Mrs. Caldwell," he said softly. The town hall was already lively when they arrived, lanterns illuminating the simple wooden structure. A small band played in one corner, and couples twirled across the floor while others chatted in groups around the perimeter. Their entrance caused a stir. Samuel was clearly respected in the community, and curiosity about his mail-order bride ran high. Within minutes, they were surrounded by well-wishers and curious neighbors. "So you're the Boston lady who captured our Sam," declared a robust woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, wife of the town's general store owner. "We've all been dying to meet you." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Penelope replied politely. "Must be quite the adjustment coming from the big city to our little corner of Texas," commented another woman. "It has its challenges," Penelope acknowledged, "but also unexpected rewards." Samuel's hand rested protectively at the small of her back as he guided her through the introductions. She met the town doctor and his wife, the banker, several ranching families, and the schoolteacher, a young woman named Alice Cooper, who seemed particularly pleased to meet another educated woman. "We must have tea sometime," Miss Cooper insisted. "It's rare to find someone out here who's read Dickens and Austen." "I'd enjoy that very much," Penelope agreed, delighted at the prospect of female friendship. The evening progressed pleasantly as Penelope danced not only with Samuel, but also with several of the other ranchers and townsmen. She found the people of Fort Worth to be straightforward but warm, their curiosity about her tempered with genuine hospitality. During a break in the dancing, Samuel fetched them each a cup of punch. They stood near an open window, grateful for the slight breeze. "You're making quite an impression," he observed. "Half the men here are envious, and the women are already planning to recruit you for their church auxiliary." Penelope laughed. "They've been very welcoming. I wasn't sure what to expect." "Folks around here judge people on their character, not their background," Samuel said. And they can see what I saw right away, that you've got plenty of backbone under those fine manners." She was about to respond when a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man staggered in, his clothes trail worn and dusty, his eyes scanning the room wildly until they locked onto Samuel. "Caldwell," he called, his voice slurred with drink. "I got a bone to pick with you." Samuel stiffened beside her. "Stay here," he murmured to Penelope before moving toward the intruder. The crowd parted, creating a space around the two men. Penelope watched anxiously as her husband approached the stranger with controlled caution. "Evening, Tucker," Samuel said evenly. "You're interrupting a social gathering." "Don't care," the man Tucker spat. "You cost me my job, run me off your land like I was nothing." "You were stealing cattle," Samuel replied, his voice carrying in the suddenly quiet hall. "You're lucky I didn't have you arrested." Tucker's hand moved toward his waist, and Penelope's heart lurched as she realized he was reaching for a gun. Before he could draw, however, two men from the crowd moved swiftly, restraining him. "That's enough, Tucker," said one of them, who Penelope recognized as the town sheriff. "You're drunk and making a fool of yourself." As the sheriff and his deputy escorted the struggling man outside, the tension in the room gradually dissipated. The band struck up another tune and conversations resumed, though many glances were directed toward Samuel. He returned to Penelope's side, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry about that. Jeb Tucker was a hand I had to fire last month when we caught him running off cattle to sell on his own." "Are you all right?" she asked, noting the tight set of his jaw. "Fine. Just didn't want your first social event to include that kind of excitement." He sighed. "Might be best if we head home. Tucker's got friends in town, and I'd rather not risk any more confrontations." Though disappointed to cut the evening short, Penelope understood his concern. They made their apologies and goodbyes, with many of the townspeople expressing regret at their early departure. The ride home was quiet, Samuel obviously troubled by the encounter. Penelope waited until they were preparing for bed to broach the subject again. "Does this happen often? Former employees threatening you?" Samuel shook his head as he removed his tie. "Tucker's the first. Most hands who leave do so on good terms, but he took the firing personally. He'd been with us for almost a year, and I thought he was trustworthy until Pedro caught him driving 3 head of cattle toward the south boundary late one night. You think he might cause more trouble? The sheriff will likely hold him until he sobers up, then run him out of town." Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, removing his boots. "But we'll keep an eye out. I don't want you worrying, though. The ranch is secure." Penelope sat beside him, laying a hand on his arm. "I'm not worried for myself, Samuel. I'm concerned for you." He seemed very angry. Samuel covered her hand with his. "It's part of ranching life, I'm afraid. Can't always avoid conflict." He smiled faintly. "One more thing they probably didn't mention in those Boston finishing schools of yours: how to be a rancher's wife during troubled times. I'm a quick study, remember." She leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, I find I'm quite protective of my husband. If that man had pulled his gun, I might have done something rather unladylike." Samuel chuckled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Now that I'd have paid to see." He turned to kiss her softly. "Thank you for understanding about leaving early. I promise we'll attend the next social event from beginning to end." "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Caldwell." September brought cooler temperatures and preparations for the coming winter. The ranch became a hive of activity as hay was cut and stored, firewood was split and stacked, and the last vegetables from the garden were preserved in jars that lined the cellar shelves. Penelope threw herself into these tasks with enthusiasm, learning from Mrs. Rivera how to can tomatoes and pickle cucumbers, how to make soap from rendered fat and lye, how to store root vegetables in sand to keep them fresh through the winter months. "My mother would faint if she could see me now," Penelope remarked one afternoon as she and the housekeeper churned butter on the back porch. She considered cooking beneath a lady's dignity. Mrs. Rivera snorted. "No work is beneath dignity if it feeds your family." It was perhaps the longest statement the taciturn woman had ever made to her, and Penelope treasured it as a sign of growing acceptance. Samuel, meanwhile, was occupied with the fall roundup, gathering cattle from the far reaches of the ranch, counting and assessing the herd before winter set in. He often returned late, exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress. One evening in late September, he arrived home earlier than expected, his expression unusually animated. "I have news," he announced as he washed up for supper. "Got a telegram from a buyer in Chicago today. He wants our entire fall surplus, 40 head at premium prices." "Samuel, that's wonderful," Penelope exclaimed, understanding enough about ranch economics now to recognize what a windfall this represented. "It means I'll need to go to Fort Worth for a few days next week to arrange shipping," he continued. "I was thinking you might come along. We could stay at the hotel, maybe see about ordering some things you've been wanting for the house." The prospect of a few days in town, with actual shops and perhaps the company of Miss Cooper, whom she'd visited for tea several times, was enticing. "I'd like that very much." "Good. We'll leave Monday then." They departed as planned, leaving Mrs. Rivera in charge of the ranch house and Pedro overseeing the hands. The September morning was crisp and clear as their wagon rolled toward Fort Worth, the landscape transformed by autumn's touch. Fort Worth had continued to grow in the months since Penelope's arrival, the railroad bringing increased commerce and new residents. The Grand Hotel, where Samuel had reserved rooms, was a recent addition to the town, 3 stories of red brick, with actual gas lighting in the lobby. "It's not exactly the Parker House," Samuel said as they checked in, referring to the famous Boston Hotel, "but it's the finest Fort Worth has to offer." "It's lovely," Penelope assured him, impressed by the relatively luxurious accommodations. Their room featured a large bed with a proper mattress, a washstand with running water, and curtains that actually matched the bedspread. After months of practical ranch living, it seemed positively opulent. The next few days passed in a pleasant blur of activity. While Samuel met with cattle buyers and railroad agents, Penelope explored the shops of Fort Worth, purchasing fabric for new curtains, a set of books for their growing library, and a few modest personal items: a new hairbrush, a bottle of lavender water, simple luxuries she'd done without since leaving Boston. On their third evening in town, Samuel surprised her with dinner at the hotel's dining room, followed by attendance at a traveling theatrical company's performance of The Taming of the Shrew at the newly constructed Opera House. "I know it's not the same quality you'd have seen in Boston," he said as they took their seats, "but I thought you might enjoy it nonetheless." "It's perfect," she said sincerely, touched by his thoughtfulness. The production was indeed somewhat amateurish compared to those she'd attended in the East, but Penelope found herself thoroughly enjoying the experience. The simple pleasure of an evening's entertainment, sitting beside her husband in public, reinforced how far she'd come from the desperate young woman who had arrived in Texas just months ago. As they walked back to the hotel under a canopy of stars, Samuel's arm around her waist, Penelope felt a surge of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her here. "Penny for your thoughts," Samuel said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am," she replied honestly. "When I left Boston, I was terrified of what awaited me. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the lamplight. Do you mean that? With all my heart. Samuel cupped her face in his hands. I thank God every day for bringing you to me, Penelope. You've brought life and light to the ranch in ways I never imagined possible. Their kiss, there on the streets of Fort Worth, held none of the hesitancy of their early days together. It was the kiss of a couple who had found in each other not just security or convenience, but genuine love. The remainder of their stay in town was equally pleasant, but by the time they headed back to the ranch on Friday, both were ready to return home. For that was what the ranch had become to Penelope, home, in every sense of the word. As October turned to November, the first real cold snap of the season descended on the ranch. Frost painted the grass silver in the mornings, and breath fogged in the air as the ranch hands went about their chores. Inside the house, fires burned continuously in the fireplaces, and extra quilts appeared on the beds. It was during this time that Penelope began to suspect a change in her condition. The subtle signs were familiar to her from observing married friends in Boston: the tender breasts, the unusual fatigue, the queasiness that visited each morning. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, not wanting to raise hopes until she was certain. But as November progressed, and her monthly cycle failed to appear for the second time, she knew she needed to confide in someone. Mrs. Rivera was the obvious choice. The housekeeper had mellowed considerably toward Penelope over the months, and her experience in such matters would be valuable. Mrs. Rivera, Penelope began one morning as they kneaded bread dough side by side in the kitchen, may I ask you something of a personal nature? The older woman's hands never paused in their rhythmic work. You are with child, she stated matter-of-factly. Penelope's surprise must have shown on her face, for Mrs. Rivera actually chuckled, a rare sound indeed. I have raised 5 children of my own and helped many women through their time, she explained. I recognize the signs. So you think it's true? See. The sickness in the morning, the way you turned pale at the smell of coffee, how you fell asleep in the rocking chair yesterday afternoon, all signs of new life. A mixture of excitement and apprehension filled Penelope. I haven't told Samuel yet. I wanted to be sure, Mrs. Rivera nodded approvingly. Wise men become foolish when they learn a child is coming. They hover and worry. She patted Penelope's hand, leaving a dusting of flour. But you should tell him soon. He will be very happy. That evening, after supper, Penelope asked Samuel to join her for a walk, despite the chilly weather. Bundled in coats and scarves, they strolled toward the small rise that had become one of their favorite spots on the ranch. Is everything all right? Samuel asked as they reached the top, concern in his voice. You've been quiet today. Penelope turned to face him, suddenly nervous despite her certainty that he would welcome the news. Everything is wonderful, actually. I have something to tell you. She took his gloved hands in hers. Samuel, we're going to have a baby. Sometime in early summer, I believe. His expression transformed from concern to astonishment to pure joy in the space of seconds. A baby? You're certain? As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation. Mrs. Rivera agrees with my assessment. Without warning, Samuel lifted her off her feet, spinning her around once before carefully setting her down again. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our child. His hand moved to rest gently against her still flat stomach. Penelope, I've never been happier than at this moment. She covered his hand with hers. Nor have I. He gathered her close, mindful of her condition even in his excitement. You've given me everything I never knew I needed, he murmured against her hair. A true partner, a loving wife, and now a child. How did I get so blessed? We blessed each other, she replied softly. 2 lost souls who found exactly what they needed in the most unexpected place. The news of the coming baby transformed life at the Caldwell Ranch. Samuel, true to Mrs. Rivera's prediction, became almost comically protective of his wife, insisting she rest more and lift less. The ranch hands, once they were told, treated her with a kind of reverent care that both touched and amused Penelope. Mrs. Rivera proved an invaluable guide, sharing wisdom from her own experiences and the traditions of her Mexican heritage. Under her direction, the attic was searched for the cradle that had held Samuel as an infant, which Pedro then carefully restored to gleaming perfection. Christmas that year was especially joyous. Though simple by Eastern standards, a pine tree cut from the northern edge of the property, decorated with paper chains and popcorn strings, presents few but thoughtfully chosen, it was filled with anticipation for the future. Samuel's gift to Penelope was a rocking chair he'd secretly commissioned from the town's furniture maker, crafted of polished oak with a cushioned seat and back. "For when you're nursing our child," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood. Her gift to him was a handmade quilt she'd been working on in secret for weeks, pieced together from scraps of fabric with a pattern of stars against a dark blue background. "For the nights you're out checking the herd," she told him, "to keep you warm until you return to me." Winter settled over the ranch in earnest after Christmas, bringing snow and bitter cold that tested the preparations they'd made in fall. The cattle huddled in sheltered areas, fed with the hay they'd stored, while inside the house, life centered around the fireplaces and kitchen stove. Penelope's body changed gradually, her condition becoming visible by February. She altered her dresses to accommodate her expanding waistline, letting out seams and adding panels with fabric from her Fort Worth purchases. Samuel found endless fascination in these changes, often resting his hand on her growing belly in the privacy of their bedroom, marveling when he felt the first flutters of movement. "Strong, like his mother," he declared after feeling a particularly vigorous kick. "Or her father," Penelope countered with a smile. They had decided not to predict the baby's gender, agreeing that either a son or daughter would be equally welcomed and loved. March brought the first signs of spring green shoots pushing through the soil, longer days, and the births of new calves in the herd. The promise of renewal surrounded them as they prepared for their own new arrival. Dr. Wilson from Fort Worth made a special trip to the ranch to examine Penelope, pronouncing her healthy and the pregnancy progressing normally. "Another 3 months or so," he estimated. "Just keep doing what you're doing, Mrs. Caldwell. Nature knows its business." April and May passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. A corner of their bedroom was transformed into a nursery area, with the restored cradle, a small chest for baby clothes, and a changing table Samuel built himself. Penelope sewed tiny garments in the evenings while Mrs. Rivera knitted soft blankets and booties. The baby arrived on a warm June evening, after a labor that began at dawn and lasted into the night. Mrs. Rivera served as midwife, her capable hands and calm demeanor guiding Penelope through the ordeal while Samuel paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. The first cry of their child, strong and indignant, came just as the stars emerged in the night sky. Mrs. Rivera opened the door to admit Samuel, her usually stern face softened with joy. "You have a son, Senor Caldwell, healthy and strong." Samuel approached the bed where Penelope lay exhausted but radiant, their newborn cradled in her arms. The tiny boy had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, marveling when the little fingers reflexively curled around his. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on final choices. Now, looking at their son's face, Penelope knew. "William," she said softly. "After your father." William Samuel Caldwell. Tears glistened in Samuel's eyes as he leaned down to kiss first his son's forehead, then his wife's lips. "It's perfect. He's perfect. You're perfect." Mrs. Rivera discreetly withdrew, leaving the new family to their private joy. That night, Samuel insisted on staying awake while Penelope slept, holding their son securely against his chest as he sat in the new rocking chair. Penelope woke briefly near dawn to find them, thus her strong, capable husband, cradling their tiny son with infinite tenderness, whispering promises and dreams to the sleeping infant. The sight filled her heart almost to bursting. From desperate mail order, bride to beloved wife and mother in just under a year, a transformation she could never have imagined when she'd stood alone and afraid on the Fort Worth train platform. "I'm not what you expected," she had apologized that first day. "You're everything I never knew I needed," he had replied. As she drifted back to sleep, Penelope knew those words had proven true for both of them. In finding each other, they had each found not just security or companionship, but their true home. William grew quickly, a healthy, curious baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick smile. The ranch flourished as well, the cattle operation expanding under Samuel's careful management and Penelope's keen eye for the financial side of the business. By William's first birthday, the Caldwell Ranch was prospering as never before. The original house had been expanded to include a proper nursery and a small library where Penelope's growing collection of books was housed. Mrs. Rivera, now officially abuela to young William, continued to run the household with efficient affection. The celebration of their son's first year, a small gathering including the ranch hands, Miss Cooper, now Mrs. Thornton, having married the town's young doctor, and a few other friends from Fort Worth, found Samuel and Penelope standing arm in arm on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant hues. "Happy?" Samuel asked, his arm tightening around her waist. Penelope leaned into his embrace, watching as William toddled unsteadily across the yard, pursued by Pedro's youngest daughter who had appointed herself his protector. "Completely, and you, more than I ever thought possible." He turned her gently to face him. "You know, when I sent that advertisement east, I was looking for practicality, someone to help run the house, maybe provide some companionship. And instead you got a Boston bluestocking with no practical skills whatsoever," she teased. "I got a miracle," he corrected her softly. "A woman of courage and intelligence who became not just my wife but my partner in every sense." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I love you, Penelope Caldwell, more with each passing day. And I love you, Samuel, for giving me a home, a family, and a life beyond anything I could have imagined." Their kiss was interrupted by William's delighted squeal as he discovered a colorful butterfly, his chubby hands reaching toward it in wonder. They turned as one to watch him, their hearts full with the simple joy of the moment. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the land in gold and amber, the same colors that had greeted Penelope on her first evening at the ranch. But where once that vast expanse had seemed alien and intimidating, it now represented all that she held dear: her home, her heritage, her future. From the unexpected meeting of two strangers had grown a love as enduring and expansive as the Texas sky above them, proof that sometimes life's most precious gifts come in packages, nothing like what we expected, but exactly what we needed all along.